Hello and welcome to Fresh Perspectives. My name is Gail, and my guest today is Steve Raynor, also known as Ken Hardley, who, by the way, has started having his Rolling Hills radio programs airing on this channel. So that should be a special treat for everybody. Thank you for coming on. I almost called you Ken. Steve and I are going to be talking about tips for parents for parenting.
And now the pressure's on. I have to be a special treat.
Yeah. Well, I meant with are you still going to call it the Rolling Hills radio program now that it's going to be on television?
Yes, it's Rolling Hills Radio. It's a television show about a radio show. How's that?
Okay,
Yeah.
That sounds good. Okay. Now, why should we be concerned with parent management? Almost everyone is a parent. Weren't we all raised and turned out fine? Do we really have anything to learn?
Great question. Yeah, because today we'll talk about parenting tips, and sometimes we refer to parenting management, because parenting is indeed a big task that very few of us are really prepared for. We think we are. As you said, we're born and we say, I was raised and it seemed to go pretty well. I think things are fine, but in reality, you might remember a movie, I forgot the name of it, but the Keanu Reeves character said, in this country we need to have a license to do most anything, even fishing. But anybody can have a kid without any knowledge at all or any background about what is a good way to help this child grow up to be a constructive adult. So, yeah, we might think about parenting goals. We might think about what do we want to do as a parent. We have, it's good to keep in mind that our end product is going to be a well-adjusted adult with any luck at all.
Right.
So that's a goal that we need to keep in mind.
Well, that's pretty much what my metaphysics teacher told me years ago, that we're pretty much still children ourselves when we start having children.
That's the truth.
We've just gotten around to finishing growing up, and we're pretty inexperienced about just about everything still. And so that, as a general rule, most parents make a lot of mistakes because they just don't know how it's supposed to be done.
Yeah, and most of us become parents at an earlier age than we have finished our own personal development, as you said. At this point, we know neuroscientists tell us that our brain really isn't adult until we're about 26 years old.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
So we're thinking very short term. We're not able to kind of think things through in a kind of a constructive way sometimes. In addition to that, we kind of have ingrained memories from our very early childhood ourselves, and however we were parented, we just do that by reflex, even if we don't think about it. Have you ever said to yourself, gee, I'm acting just like my mother? And I've certainly done that with my own children.
Well, you'll know a lot of people say that after they look in the mirror when they get to be middle-aged.
Yeah, that happens.
I looked in the mirror and saw my mother.
Right? I say, who is that old guy?
Yeah. What are appropriate goals for parents?
Well, I think it's, first of all, yes, thinking ahead. What kind of an adult do we want to help this person become? But it's kind of paradoxical because at the same time, we have a little human being right there in front of us. And I think it's very important to remember, this is a person, and we need to treat that person with respect. Sometimes we fall into the, kind of treating a child as a pet or as a possession or something like that. That really doesn't help. So thinking ahead, what kind of a human being do we want our child to become? Well, we would love them to become confident as a rule, to feel good about themselves, to feel comfortable, to their default kind of mood, to be happy, to be joyful, content, patient, trusting, have good self-esteem, think well of oneself. Not to be arrogant or narcissistic, but to have a good self-esteem and not worry about how you're coming across all the time or whether or not you're a good person. Somebody who relates well to other people, gets along well with others, or can form intimate relationships and maintain them. Someone who can think independently. Doesn't depend on other people to give them their opinions. Don't depend on authority figures to tell you something and just believe it because they're in a position of authority. We want to raise children who can think for themselves.
Make their own decisions.
Very much so. Be able to think critically.
You can make some really big mistakes in life if you do things the way other people tell you they think that you should do them.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
That can definitely happen.
Yeah, I know I've done it. Okay, does this mean a parent has to spend a lot of energy learning how to act and learning how to be?
A lot of energy. Well, I think we need to start off with recognizing that we are tremendously powerful as parents, more so than we often realize, especially until a kid gets to be a certain age. We are the child's universe. You know, we have a lot of things we have to pay attention to. We have to balance our checkbook, we have to go shopping, we have to keep our boss happy. All those things are going through our minds and work on our relationship. The child has one thing going on. That's kind of playing mom, you know, seeing what she's about. And mom, because the reason is because mom is his or her universe. And to an extent, dad too, depending on who the primary caregiver is, usually it's mom.
You're talking about preschool age kids, right?
We're talking about infants and then to a lesser extent toddlers. Now, so when mom is unhappy, the universe is not a good place to be for an infant. Something is wrong, something's amiss, something's not resonating very well. So the infant tries really hard. That's part of why infants smile, because it changes mom's behavior. And they get reinforced. They see, I can smile and make mom look happier, which means the universe becomes a nice place. So the child begins to smile more to get that reward. Then as time goes on, you know, we're looking at a toddler and they begin to explore their world a little bit and move around and touch things they're not supposed to touch and all of that. But still, mom's reaction, dad's reaction, that's a really big deal. So we have so much power as parents. Just a facial expression, a nod, a touch. Those are the things that children really are tuned into, decreasingly so as time goes on, but it never completely goes away. So being aware of that, we want to be good role models. We want to be sure that first of all, that we understand that children learn what we teach them, not what we mean to teach them. A great psychologist, B.F. Skinner, said that. If we tell a kid, you know, you must be patient, you must treat other people well, and then you hit them, the message that you've given them is completely different than the message that you've told them. And what they really learned is that it's okay to hit people and all that stuff. So we need to keep that in mind. And as a role model, remain calm, have a good energy, patience, role model, good problem solving when something comes along. Instead of getting angry or becoming frustrated, let the child see you solve the problem rationally. Cooperate with other people, show kindness, show compassion. So our first step might be as a parent to be a good role model, because that's how children are learning primarily to start off with.
Yeah, okay. Let's see, is parenting easy? Simply discipline the child, correct them when they do something wrong?
We fall into that very easily, don't we? You know, we kind of look at ourselves sometimes as the behavior police. You know, we'll watch the kid. When the kid does something wrong, we'll swoop in and correct them and tell them that was a bad thing to do, or, you know, criticize them. And otherwise, what we refer to sometimes as disciplining, spanking, and all those things might fall into that. And really, that falls under the subtitle of punishment. That is, when you produce a behavior and something bad happens after that behavior, the definition of that is, or the label for that definition is punishment. And so we kind of think of ourselves as behavior police a lot of times. But the word and we look at them, discipline and punishment, as kind of synonyms. You know, we need to discipline the child. A kid is being bad in the supermarket, that kid needs to be disciplined. The Latin root of the word discipline is to learn. It's not to spank, it's not to criticize, it's not to yell, it is to learn. And so when we talk about discipline, what we're really talking about is helping the child develop positive habits, helping the child learn constructive ways to deal with their reality, to deal with problems, to deal with things that come up. So instead of being a behavior policeman, we can become a success mentor, help the child get disciplined, develop positive habits. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, if a parent becomes a success mentor, what does he or she need to do?
The first thing you need to do is learn that the environment is very, very powerful. A parent is part of the environment. So we have to look at understanding the child's behavior in relation to the environment. And one of the first things we need to flush and get rid of altogether is blaming. Because it's not the child's fault, it's not the parent's fault, it's not the teacher's fault or whatever. It's something is going on in the environment that we need to change around somehow. Because this blaming thing is counter to learning. If you learn how to say, well, I did this because that guy acted that way, then you've taken all the potential for learning off your own back. Do you see? Mm-hmm. So we need to look at ways to kind of make things happen better. So as parents, we would like to focus on teaching a child what to do as opposed to teaching them what not to do. Again, success mentor as opposed to the behavior police. One of the things that we often forget also is that children have great resources within themselves. And it's perfectly okay to let children struggle. It's perfectly okay to let them try to figure out things on their own. You know, not only do we think that we're behavior police a lot of times we're also the ultimate teacher. Wait just a minute, I'll show you what to do, say, and think. So the message is, there are a lot of messages there. First of all, you can't really figure this out. I'll tell you how to think. I'll tell you how to solve this problem. I'll tell you how to act. The message is, you have to look to other people for your solutions. Mm-hmm. So it's perfectly okay to have the child struggle and try to figure things out, and you know, as a parent, it's really hard to do sometimes. You may even allow your child to fail at this, that, or the other thing. Those are wonderful learning experiences. Be there to support, be there to facilitate, give the child an occasional idea here and there, be sure to do a lot of praising. And that's what's going to put the child on a track to become very self-confident, to realize the solutions lie within. So when children are empowered, they feel that they are good. They feel that they are lovable. They feel that they're supported. And that's really a huge thing. If we're constantly criticizing, the child might internalize that and grow up with this little tape loop in their head saying, you know, you did that wrong, you're not doing things the way they should be done, and that kind of thing. Instead, always express to the child how lovable they are, how good they are, how smart they are, how bright they are, all those kinds of things. And try to catch them being good. Sometimes you have to step in and criticize. Sometimes you have to step in and say that's not something you need to do. But it's important to praise way more than you criticize.
Right.
Sometimes
right.
we use a ratio of 7 to 1. You know, 7
Really?
nice things to 1 criticism.
Oh.
I'd rather say 20 to 1, but.
Okay, so how do we stop a bad behavior? For example, a child throwing a tantrum. What should the parent do when the child is throwing a tantrum?
Because we often think, I just need to step in and make that kid cut it out. You know, a good whack in the butt will make that tantrum go away. Well, a punishment, and it will.
Mm-hmm. Temporarily.
Exactly. Punishment is quick and easy. But there are a bunch of problems with it. First of all, it's temporary. Mm-hmm. The child has learned not the things that we want him to learn. He has learned something else. We would like him to learn, express yourself in a different way. So, you know, temper tantrums aren't a good solution to your problem. But what he's really learned is, when I do this in front of that guy, I get punished. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to do that in front of that guy. Mm-hmm. But he'll do it in other places, because one of the characteristics of punishment is you don't produce the behavior in front of the punishing agent. So, I mean, sometimes we've seen kids who are really kind of maladaptive and have trouble until dad shows up, mm-hmm. and then suddenly walks the line. What that generally tells you is this kid is probably getting punished by dad. Mm-hmm. So he's learned not to produce those behaviors in front of dad. What we'd rather have him learn is a different way of doing things. Other problems with punishment is, again, we're looking at what the child might be like as an adult. Kids who are a lot of punishment, especially harsh criticism and spanking, have a much higher chance of having depression when they grow up, having an anxiety disorder, having a problem with substance abuse, having a problem with spousal abuse, having a one study showed that there was a big problem with abusing elderly parents when they get older, self-harm, and other much more subtle psychological effects. So when we look at spanking, we have to keep in mind we're taking a risk of those things happening. Also, in spanking, we're modeling the behaviors that we would like the child not to do. It teaches children to be alert to what will keep him from being punished. It's kind of like what we know about torture. People will say anything they have to say in order to get the torturing to stop. They're not necessarily telling the truth. Punishment is like that. The child will do whatever he has to do in order not to get punished. It has almost nothing to do with learning and adaptive behavior.
Do you think that planned ignoring would be something you could do when a child's throwing a tantrum?
Absolutely. Excuse me. One of the things that we would use instead of punishment. Now, punishment is quick and easy. Now, when you say planned ignoring, what we would use that in a circumstance when we believe that the behavior occurs for the purpose of getting social interaction, attention, and that is, somebody might come along and say, "Oh, what is your problem?" and try to engage the child in conversation about what can we do to help you feel better. What you've basically done is you've reinforced tantrum behavior. By
asking what they can do to make you feel better?
That's right.
They're reinforcing the tantrum behavior.
Whatever behavior you see, if you do a reinforcer after that behavior, the likelihood of that behavior happening again goes up. So if the kid is throwing a tantrum and you show up and start engaging them nicely, what's the probability of throwing a tantrum the next time the kid wants something or wants conversation or attention? It goes way up. The child has learned tantruming is a good way to get mom or somebody to pay attention to me and treat me nicely. Conversely, somebody shows up and starts yelling at the kid or hitting the kid, and tantrums don't go away or they keep recurring. By definition, that means we've reinforced the tantrum behavior. Sometimes we think that hitting a child or yelling at a child is something the child doesn't want to happen. That's just not the case.
Isn't it?
Not at all. If the child can change his or her environment, that by itself is a big reinforcer. If you can upset dad to the point where he hits you, that's a big reinforcer.
Wow.
So we have to pay attention to that. Now, the other side of that is take away the reinforcer. Don't do any interaction. Don't do any attention. Now, the characteristics of punishment are it's quick and easy, and the child suppresses the behavior in front of the punishing agent.
For now.
Now, planned ignoring, what you're talking about, which is removing the reinforcer, there are some characteristics about that make it more kind of a pain. First of all, it takes a long time. The child will produce the behavior more and more trying to get that reinforcer.
Oh, is that right? It increases for a while?
It does. In fact, we have a name for it. It's called response burst. It's kind of like this. If you have a Bic lighter and you do a behavior, which is do that, and the flame appears, doing this is the behavior, the flame appearing is the reward, the reinforcer. Now what happens when it runs out of butane? You do that and there's no flame. So you do it more frequently, you do it harder, your heart rate may go up a little bit until you eventually, when you stop getting the reward of the flame, you give up and you throw it away. So that's what extinction is like. The child will produce the behavior more frequently, the child will produce the behavior with greater duration. The tantrum, instead of lasting 1 minute, might last 5 minutes. And the magnitude of the behavior might go up. The severity of the tantrum might be worse. And the child might produce new behaviors. Maybe he used to just roll around on the rug and scream. That doesn't work. He really wants this attention, so he'll try new things. Maybe he'll bang his head. Maybe he'll wet his pants. Try new things. But the important thing is, using planned ignoring, is to just ride that out.
Ride out the increase in the behavior, because eventually it'll settle down.
It very much will. It very much will. If we've chosen the right reinforcer, usually we have. Usually the attention does maintain the behavior we don't like. The nice thing about now suffering through all of that, the response burst and the people staring at you in the supermarket saying, "Why don't you hit that kid?" You have to live through all of that. But the nice part is, after you live through that, the child has internalized a new response. The child has learned, this isn't getting me anywhere. I got to do new things to get mom to pay attention to.
Being a nice kid, behaving is going to get me attention.
Bingo. That's exactly the thing. Whenever you use planned ignoring, the other side of that is you want to reward the good behaviors. Because remember, whatever you pay attention to is going to happen more frequently. Whatever you give energy to will increase. So planned ignoring with the stuff we don't like, and then when he's doing nice things, when he's nice to his sister, when he speaks politely, when he chews with his mouth closed, anything you can find that's going well, reward him. A little touch on the shoulder, saying, "Hey, you're a good kid." All that stuff, and eventually, the good behavior will appear so much that he won't have time to do the knucklehead things.
Oh, yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. What about other behaviors that need to be stopped, like the kids don't get around to doing their homework and they don't do the household chores when they're asked to?
That happens?
Well, I suppose it does.
I've heard about that stuff, Gail. Well, the good news is we can help these kids with this, because kids that's part of their job growing up. They have to try different stuff and see what works. I
see what they can get away with.
It's kind of like that. It starts at a very young age. We realize up until about 7 months, children are just kind of a bundle of different behaviors that they spit out, and we just let them do that. When they start moving around, their job is to kind of touch stuff they're not supposed to touch, and stick their fingers in wall sockets and stuff like that. So we manage all of that, and it's that's part of evolution designed them that way. We have to, as human beings, explore our environment to figure it out. So
I know babies at a certain age tend to put everything in their mouth.
Yeah, very much so. And that's to try to make that not happen is like telling the child you aren't okay. This thing that you're programmed to do, that your brain is insisting that you do, you may not do that. Better yet, to manage that behavior, because the child will grow out of it. The child will stop, and there's so many things that children grow out of that we don't need to really worry about. That's one thing. Now, of course, we don't want to have little things laying around the living room floor that the child could choke on.
Right.
So what we do is we manage that situation. Instead of giving them little Legos to play with, give them a ball. Things along those lines, and always be alert to make sure that there are no choking hazards around. Later, if the kid gets to be 5 years old and still sticking things in his or her mouth, then we can kind of pay attention to that, and we can do something about it. But what we don't want to do is try to teach children to do things that biology is telling them they must do right now. Mouthing objects is a way to explore their environment. That's a stage that all human beings go through. It's like trying to teach a 2-year-old how to stay out of the road. Ain't gonna happen. He just doesn't have the prerequisite skills.
You just have to be there to make sure they don't do it.
That's it. Yeah, you can start training how to look both ways and all those things that you do, but there's no way in the world this kid's gonna get that. So to be punished going near the road is really, that means we have not managed the environment well enough. We need to create a situation where he can't get into the road by himself, because he may well do that, and there's no teaching him it too. When he gets to be 5, we can teach him that.
I guess that's why they make playpens and things for
playpens are really
little babies.
I love playpens. They once in a while you run across a kid like my grandson who just won't have it.
Really?
And we deal with that. But you need to put kids in a safe environment.
Yep. What are some things a parent should do to help a child develop a strong, positive personality?
Well, first of all, focus on your response. Okay, what we need to do, I mentioned earlier about blame. We don't need to say, you shouldn't have done that. Stay away from blame. Focus on what it is that what your response is. What can you do to help facilitate a better outcome for the child for this particular circumstance? That didn't work out very well for you, dude. What can we do next time? Or what might be, and work that through with a child. It's very important to stress with a child. No one's at fault here. We'll have to do things differently next time. We're a blame-addicted culture. We love to say, it was somebody else's fault, or even our fault. Gee, I'm sorry, I really did that. I shouldn't have done that. In reality, that's mostly not helpful. If we do a lot of blaming, we'll end up with shame. Now, guilt, not such a bad thing. A little guilt kind of tells us, I just did something that doesn't really jive with my moral compass here. Maybe I should do it differently next time. But if that gets internalized over time, that's shame, and that's toxic. That's a very different thing, and people grow up with all kinds of emotional problems with that. So we start off with that. Displays of affection should greatly outnumber criticisms. Love, affection, and caring are the number one thing. They're the most important thing. The child has to feel like she's okay in this world. And keep in mind, whatever you give energy to will increase. If you pay attention to the bad behaviors all the time, you've given that energy. You've given that bad behavior fuel. And then set contingencies. Excuse me, you mentioned earlier about, let's say, cleaning your bedroom.
Right.
Set contingencies. Make sure it's not a battleground. Make sure that there's no right or wrong about this, but you can set a contingency. And you can say, when your room is orderly, then you get X, Y, or Z. Find something that the kid wants. Maybe an hour with his smartphone. Okay. I'll check at 6 o'clock every evening, and if your room is orderly, you get the smartphone for an hour. If it's not orderly, you don't get the smartphone. And you see how that works. That's no longer, you no longer have a battlefield. You no longer have the struggle between mom and daughter. But now you have this thing that you've agreed on. And if it doesn't happen, oh well, no smartphone.
Of course, when you and I were kids, there was no such thing as a smartphone.
No smartphones. Yeah, we had, in fact, I grew up with a party line.
Oh yeah, me too. Me too, I know. And sometimes you'd have to wait for a couple of hours while somebody was chit-chatting with their friends.
If you had a bad luck to have one of those teenagers on your party line. Yeah,
Okay. Are there particular predictors that are associated with positive parenting outcomes?
There are, as a matter of fact. There are, excuse me, one of the things we didn't really touch upon was the explaining parent, the explainer, which is a kind of a variation on the correction theme. They seem like they're doing a nice thing, but to sit a 6-year-old down and to have listen to a 5-minute diatribe on why it's important that you act this or that or the other way, you're going to lose the kid after the first half sentence anyway, no matter how much follows.
Their mind is going to wander.
They're not going to listen. And so they have to sit there and pretend they're listening because, Dad will say, "Are you listening to me?" And you have to look like you're listening. So so explainers actually increase non-compliance. You can be fairly sure that the child will do what you want less often if you are a lecturer, a complainer, someone who does a lot of explaining. Excuse me. Better yet, let the contingencies do the talking. Didn't clean your room? Don't get the smartphone. You can have, excuse me, a short conversation about what's going to be happening beforehand. You can have a short conversation, and me being a fairly verbose guy, you probably noticed I talk a lot. In my practice, working a lot with kids with ADHD, I learned really fast this verbal diarrhea I get, this is not helpful. I have to boil down what I want to say in about 8 words, because that's what I get, 8 words, So I would suggest to parents, 8 words, your room really needs to be clean for a lot of reasons. And then the contingency, and then you're done. So there's that. Others that predict positive outcomes, parents who identify barriers and solve problems with the child and approaching it as a team. Your room is really messy a lot of the time. Maybe it's a safety hazard, maybe it's a health hazard, I don't know. But what can we do about that? And then you work it through with the child. Another thing that's associated with positive outcomes, verbalizations emphasize support and facilitate increased compliance. Parents who are very supportive, parents who say, you're doing a good job. I'm really proud. I really noticed the way you were so nice to your brother. You did the dishes, nobody asked. That was outstanding. Those kinds of things, that predicts a positive outcome. You know, the great writer Alice Walker said, you know, we need to stay away from punishment, and we need to really do what we can to help the child feel good about herself, because she will be so concerned with making you happy that she will have no time to do all these bad things, and she will do what you want because she loves you so much.
How interesting. Children are individuals, and we need to take that into consideration. But don't they also need to be responded to differently at different ages and different developmental levels?
Yeah, there's no question about that. Yeah, different children have different individual needs. For example, I have one grandson who just he didn't like the playpen, and just wasn't having it. I had another grandson who loved it in there. So two different little guys, same age. But at the same time, we need to realize that there are different developmental stages. And there are, you know, no matter how hard you try to get a 1-year-old, for example, to get potty trained.
Oh, yeah.
If she's not ready, you know, that's not going to happen. You need to wait a little bit longer. Some kids are potty trained at 1, and that's a wonderful thing if it is. But we need to wait until developmentally they're ready, and then we can help them along with that.
So different children are ready at different ages then?
Very much so. There's a wide variation, you know, and there's a lot of criticism that goes along with that. Well, your child is 14 months and not potty trained, right? You know, what are you doing here? What kind of a parent are you? Well, the answer is the kid isn't ready to be potty trained, and that's fine. He'll make that decision for us, and they do. You know, we lose a lot of sleep over potty training. We really don't have to. It's a developmental thing. Need to wait. Different kids develop at different ages. But there are things that we know. For neuroscientists, again, have shown us that empathy, that is the ability to share, doesn't really appear in our brains. There's a part of the brain that has to do with empathy. It really doesn't appear until about the age of 1.5 years, maybe 3 years. So to expect somebody to have empathy for another human being before that, or to be able to share, you know, you're shutting your own hand in a door. Why would you do that? You're hurting the child, you're hurting yourself. Kid just isn't ready for that. Again, set that up and manage it. Rather than expect sharing. At the age of 5, 6 years old, kids steal and kids lie. That's what they do. Now, we can't set up a situation where we make it okay.
Do you mean to tell me the vast majority of 5-year-olds steal and lie?
First of all, lie? Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're going to say things that aren't true for a variety of reasons. First of all, as we mentioned, they're testing things out. How does this go? You know, I'll tell Mom I didn't eat the cookie. You know, I didn't steal the cookies, but I really did. Well, let's see how this goes. They need to give it a try. But also, kids really have a hard time separating fact from fantasy for quite a while. So
they have really good imaginations. I mean, you know, when you see kids playing with each other, you see them coming up with scripts and everything.
Isn't that something?
Where
Isn't that
they're
fun?
Pretending they're related to each other in a certain way and everything. And
yeah.
And they do a lot of role playing when they're little. They really do.
Isn't that fun to watch?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the little voices and, you know, things like that. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. They're working through a lot of things. They're learning so much when they're doing that. Play is learning. Lying is learning. And they're sorting out for themselves what's real and what's not real. Not only are they figuring out, does this work with Mom, but there's also a component of, you know, children, actually, one of the reasons that nightmares are so frightening to children is because they don't know that they're not real.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
I suppose. But do you think that some kids lie when they've done something they think they might be in trouble for?
Yeah, and that's kind of a good strategy sometimes, isn't it? But we want people not to grow up that way. We don't want our child to be that way. So the key is, at the age of 5 and 6, when you see the line,
If somebody steals a cookie, don't make a big deal out of it.
I wouldn't make a big... depending on the situation. I mean, if the kid needs to be like gluten-free and he stole a gluten-y cookie, well, we're going to have to definitely deal with that situation. But you need to focus on the act, not the lying. You don't accept the lying. Let the kid know, that thing you said, that's not true. And then deal with the actual behavior. Now, and the same with stealing. Taking that thing, that wasn't such a good idea. But let's make sure. Again, not a lecture or whatever, but manage the situation and try to arrange circumstances so that he doesn't really have the chance to steal, or if he wants to take another kid's toy home from the kid's house, say, no, that stays here, that's his. Those kinds of things. And over time, it should become internalized. If it gets to be 9, 10, 11 years old and there's a lot of lying going on, some kind of intervention might not be. And then it's a good time to call, a guy like me.
Oh, okay.
We're talking about normal parenting here a lot of times, and sometimes problems just get really entrenched, or sometimes there's something else going on. There may be some kind of a diagnosis that we really need to look at, and there's it's a really good idea to look for help.
What about when a child won't go to bed or stay in bed after they get there?
Yeah, that's a fun one that a lot of parents go through. First of all, you have to make the decision. Is it going to be okay for the child to sleep with me or not sleep with me? Okay, and a lot of parents kind of vacillate. They don't really know what the rules are. Okay, you need to come up with that, and different parents make different decisions about that. Most parents fall on the side of the child has his or her own bed and really needs to stay in that bed. Now, most children are probably going to try to get up in the night and crawl in bed with mom and dad at some point.
Well, when they're real little, in recent years I've heard stories where they say that you can roll over onto the child while you're asleep and accidentally smother them or something if they're in bed with you.
That would be awful.
Yeah. Do you know if that happens very often?
I really don't know. I mean, I've heard stories both ways, so I'm not sure. I've heard the parents have this instinct or something. I don't know. What I do know is that usually bed is a good place for mom and dad to have together, and to invite another person in there is kind of messing up a lot of things. So we really, that makes a good case for the kid to stay in his or her own bedroom. So what often happens is the child will tantrum, scream, cry. Mom or dad go in and say, oh, what's the matter? And then, go back to the bedroom, and then screaming and crying happens again. Mom or dad appears again. And a lot of times, oh, gee, out of desperation, come on and sleep with us. So what has just happened? They just got a really cool reward for tantruming.
So is this a good time to use planned ignoring?
It really is. That's a good, because there's a couple of reinforcers that we just talked about. One is attention from mom and dad. Even if it's going in and whacking a kid. I mean, that's attention from mom and or dad. And secondly, what could be more rewarding when you're 2 years old than to get in this big warm bed with mom and dad right there? It's a huge reward. So we need to get rid of both of those things by simply not paying attention. And I've had this in my practice more times than I can tell you. And I'll say, there's going to be a response burst now. This is going to get worse. You need to hunker down and get ready for this. And children have tried things like banging their heads against the wall and try all kinds of new behaviors, and you need to keep the child safe, of course. And in that, well, it's happened a couple times. We put up a cushion between the wall and the child, so when he bangs his head, he's banging his head against the cushion and he can't hurt himself. And then you just wait it out. And again, what has happened is the child learned staying in my own bed is something that I really need to do, and it's okay. I can do that. I wake up in the morning and things are fine again. So planned ignoring is the way to go. Some parents just can't do that. And they end up with kids that are 6, 7 years old still sleeping with them.
Although, I do know that sometimes kids, when they realize that the other kids their age aren't doing what they're doing, though they sometimes think, oh, well, if I keep doing this, the other kids might find out, and then, and then I'll be embarrassed and everything.
You've hit up on a very, very good way for children to learn things, embarrassment. And usually kids begin to get a sense of embarrassment usually 4 or 5 years old. And so they look around and see other kids, other kids aren't crying in school. And they're looking at me like, like something's wrong with me because I'm crying in school. And that in itself is a great learning thing in a child. Again, we have to let the kids struggle sometimes. And the child will learn a lot of things by being embarrassed. A lot of times we kind of fool ourselves into thinking, I have to stop this crying in schools thing, choosing that as one behavior to talk about. Well, what are you really worried about? Are you worried about that this child might still be crying in school when he turns 17? No, it will go away. So why choose that as a battleground? We have other things that we need to concern ourselves with. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Although I think if the kid is crying in school, they're probably not focused too much on their schoolwork, I'm thinking.
Right.
Right. So
and there may be a reason too. We always want to rule out other things first. We want to make sure there's no medical situation. If there's a behavior that keeps going on, we rule out medical first. And then we look at, is there something in the environment that we have to change? Maybe there's a kid bullying or something like that.
Yeah, that is a fairly common one, I think.
It's a big one, yeah.
How can we teach a child good manners?
Oh, good manners, yeah, that's something we do want to pay attention to at home, and the reason is this, because we want the child to have good manners outside of the home. So in the home is a good place to continue to show good manners, and it becomes ingrained, it becomes habitual. So learning good table manners, for example, not putting your feet up on the chair while you're eating, and basic table manner kinds of things are important at home, because when the child gets into the business world, it would be really a good idea for him or her to be able to pay attention to what's going on at the lunch table doing a business lunch, as opposed to worrying about, now let's see, I'm supposed to chew with my mouth closed. And, it should just be a habit. Good manners should be a habit. And also treating people with respect. Should be a habit with good manners. Sometimes people think of manners as being kind of an artificial, cultural a set of protocols that we do for no apparent reason. Most good manners are really a way to show respect for other people. And respect is a huge deal in terms of your own self-esteem. If you show someone else respect, you're going to feel better about yourself. So again, talking, ingraining the habits of good manners are really important at home. Little things like when the other person is talking, listen, which you, by the way, are very good at, Gail. So.
Oh, sure. What about sibling fighting? That sibling rivalry that you hear about?
Yeah. Siblings kind of do that, don't they, sometimes? Yeah. Did you do that when you were?
I'm not sure. I don't remember it that
Maybe
well.
You were extraordinary. Most do.
I remember just having pets around the house. They'll get some sibling rivalry going.
Sure.
They'll get jealous of each other. I can be petting one cat, and the other cat notices and starts to look kind of ornery,
Right.
stuff like that. I remember my mother, when she was still alive, repeating a story about Christmas. She had gone out, it was, in the 1960s, when instead of wearing winter boots that went over the top of the shoes, they had invented boots that you put your feet directly into. And so you had to have something to carry your shoes in, and then they invented these things to carry the shoes in on the way to school and back. And my mother had picked out one for me. She was going to get one for me and one for my sister, but I was in high school and she's 6 years younger than me, so she was still in elementary school. And apparently the place where my mother was buying it was, the person told her that Those ones like you're getting for Gail, those aren't for the little girls, This other thing is what you give to the little girls. Well, apparently my mother really should have gotten her the one that was just like mine, because on Christmas morning when we opened them up, my sister wound up having a hissy fit. The one that Gail's got is better than the one that I've got. So that's an example, I don't really remember what my mother wound up doing about it, but
Well, it's a great example.
it's just an example of something that can happen between kids. One thing, my sister used to hide things that belonged to me, and I don't know where she hid them, but whenever she hid something of mine from me, I never found it again. Maybe it was going in the trash, I don't know. But, and one time I remember using the restroom during a study hall in like maybe 8th, 9th, 10th grade, something like that. And I remember going out to use the restroom during the study hall period and getting out there and looking for something in my purse and finding 2 or 3 banana peels, and then she had those stickers they put on banana peels stuck all over everything inside my purse. She'd gotten into my purse and done all of that. So there I am in the restroom disposing of all this stuff in the wastebasket. It's like, doesn't she, it's like I could get in trouble for having food in my purse in class, you know what I mean? So, that was stuff she used to pull,
Yeah, right.
So
there's so much of that goes on between siblings. I know I have 3 daughters, and they're grown up now, but all 3 of them clue me in on the things that used to happen between the 3 of them, like you're talking about when they were little. And I said, "Oh my God, really?
You did all of that?"
you were really bad to each other."
Yeah, they can be, can't they?
Yeah. And there are a couple of things about that. Again, developmentally, those things are going to be happening. For example, we know, generally speaking, 11, 12-year-old kids are going to have trouble with siblings that are 6 to 8 years old. And we can look at the dynamic. They're a little bit embarrassed by them. They're irritated by them because they're getting into their stuff, and they follow them around. And so we can be empathic. We can help the child work through those kinds of things or whatever, but that's just a developmental stage that we're not going to be able to cure. But also there's kind of a territorial kind of thing that happens between children, especially when they're close in age. I happened to be in a circumstance recently where a grandma was holding a baby, a little under a year old, and her granddaughter came along, who was 3 years old, and started scolding the baby. "That's my grandma." And
really?
"You have your own grandma, so I want to sit on her lap. You get down now." So, but that's real deeply ingrained, with a child. So we manage that as best we can. Help her learn. Yeah, sometimes she's going to be holding this little guy, but she's going to hold you a lot too. Those kinds of things. But as far as sibling fighting, again, we can reward periods of not fighting. That might be a good way to start it. If you guys can go a day without a big visible battle that's causing an uproar in the house, we'll let you get out of doing dishes tonight. Something like that.
You know what one thing is that little kids do that usually amuses me is if somebody tells them they're cute, they'll say, "I know it."
Yeah.
I always find that so amusing.
Or maybe they'll inform other people. "Hi, I'm cute."
Do they do that? I hadn't heard that one, but I do know that they'll say, "I know it," if you tell them they're cute. How do you keep communication open with teens?
Oh yeah, that's that is something that really has to be addressed by almost everyone. First of all, don't expect a teenager to open up and start telling you all about their intimate thoughts and dilemmas and all the stuff that goes with growing up with hormones and getting through all the stage that we all had to go through. I mean, developmentally, from the ages of 13 to 18, life is kind of a pain, and we have a whole new lot of things to figure out. And mom and dad can be part of that, but they cannot and should not be an intimate part of that. That's when boundaries are beginning to be set. So when we're talking about that kind of communication, it's a good idea for parents to keep the support intact. Let the child know that I'm here for you emotionally. Let's visit about whatever you're comfortable with visiting about, but unless something comes up, let the child take care of things and let them struggle. All of that stuff. However, that said, parents have to set boundaries as well. I mean, it's still your house. It's still your car. So and it's still, there are still rules. You know, you're scheduled to be home at 9 o'clock. You need to be home at 9 o'clock. And if you're not home at 9 o'clock, this consequence will happen. And we want to set up natural consequences as much as possible. You have the car, not home at 9 o'clock. If you come home at 9:20, you're not going to have the car for a week. You see, the car is part of the privilege. You misuse that privilege, the natural consequence is you can't be trusted with a car. Again, set that contingency up ahead of time. It shouldn't be a surprise. You shouldn't be doing it on the spur of the moment, and it shouldn't be a battle between you and the kid. It should be, didn't make it home, don't get the car.
I think there's, isn't there, maybe it's not still a law, I don't know, but I remember when I was young there was some law about when a teenager was under a certain age, even if they had their driver's license, they still were not supposed to be driving after dark.
Oh, I remember that too.
Is that still in effect? Do you know?
I really don't know.
Huh. Yeah, one thing I wanted to kind of address that I've heard about that's kind of disturbing, actually, is children that don't have a conscience, and they'll go as far as to kill, like another child or something. What causes somebody to be like that?
That's a debated topic right now. Indeed, when you look at circumstances like Jeffrey Dahmer or some of the school shooters, there were signs in childhood that there were things going on that were pretty unsavory. Stabbing a dog with a pencil, or killing animals, setting fires, those kinds of things. They're red flags. And those things happen. It's a real good idea to see somebody. You're not going to punish that stuff out of a kid. You're not going to counsel that stuff out of a kid. If something isolated happens, like once you see a kid, kill an ant or a frog or something, okay, keep an eye on it. But if it happens repeatedly or whatever, don't be afraid to seek help. Don't be afraid to talk to someone. Don't be afraid to have the child looked at.
I mean, is it something that could be prevented with certain parenting techniques, or is it a mental illness, or what?
Yeah, again, it's a hotly debated topic.
So you can't really necessarily explain it then.
There are involved clinical situations that it's probably beyond the scope of this program today.
Oh,
I could come back and talk about that sometime.
Oh, okay.
It's a big topic.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to say every time you see your kid kill a frog that you're going to have a Jeffrey Dahmer on your hands. I don't mean that at all. But
he was interested in taxidermy when he was really young, I heard.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Some children do need more specialized intervention, specialized help, specialized counseling, if you will. And it's not just the kind of thing that you're talking about. Children with autism, children with attention deficit disorder, those kinds of things. Parents a lot of times figure, well, I'll take care of this. This is a family matter. Or they struggle quietly by themselves. And the help is available. Don't be shy about asking for help for your sake, as well as the child's.
Right.
But the circumstance you bring up, yes, indeed, there are, in the circumstances of a child without a quote-unquote conscience, that is something that we do want to pay attention to. And the school may bring it to your attention. Bullying situations, again, extraordinarily violent situations, or repeated kinds of things that people that without a conscience, a lot of stealing, a lot of vandalism, those kinds of things. Yeah, we want to look at those things. And again, what happens with a kid is often he or she grows up and starts getting punished all the time, which makes things worse. You know, what happens in school when you vandalize a school bus? Well, you get, suspended or humiliated in some fashion. That doesn't help anything. I mean, in terms of the kid getting better. So that's when the kid starts living through a lot of punishers and things like that. That's, ask for help.
Yeah, and another thing we should probably throw out there before the program is over, that I do think that parents should try to make sure that their family has a healthy lifestyle, that they're feeding their children foods that enhance physical and mental health, and like getting regular exercise and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really, you know a lot more about nutrition than I do. The exercise piece is a big deal. I mean, we know that adults who get X amount of exercise per week, and it's not even a lot, it alleviates depression, it alleviates anxiety, all kind of sleep better, all that stuff. The same is true for children. And especially in today's world, you mentioned that we didn't have smartphones when we were kids, and we went outside and played in mud puddles.
Right.
In today's world, it's more important than ever, I think, to make sure your kid is getting some kind of aerobic exercise, running, playing, going to the park. Make sure that's built into his or her daily schedule.
And even one thing that would be really good is if yoga classes were offered in schools, as an option from what's always been, gym class,
Right.
Things like that, they're pretty beneficial.
That would be wonderful, and along with yoga, mindfulness, helping kids, get mindfulness exercises, paying attention to what their environment is, reduce the daydreaming and those kinds of things. I was going to mention this book. We don't really have time to talk about it. I've mentioned it here before when we were talking about why people in certain cultures tend to live to be really old and stay healthy while doing it. And there's some sections in this book that, if anybody wants to read it, talks about proper parenting. Oh, good.
In here. So I just wanted to mention that. It's by John Robbins, one of my heroes, that I've learned a lot from. So
well, I hope you invite me back when I'm 100.
Oh, sure.
And maybe even before.
I'll be over 100 when you're 100, because you're a few years younger than me, So we'll have to do that.
Great.
And okay, we're down to a little over a minute. Is there anything else you want the viewing audience to know before we get finished?
I think that if there's one thing to kind of keep in mind about parenting is, I guess these are two: consistency and unconditional acceptance, unconditional love. Be sure that if something is not okay today, that it's not okay again tomorrow, and vice versa. Always be consistent, because consistency with children prevents anxiety. Children who don't have any parenting, who don't have any boundaries, who don't have any rules, they get anxiety.
Oh, do they really?
Anxiety is really a big problem for kids with no, those parents who don't have any, they never correct their children, that's a risk for anxiety. So be sure to be consistent with your boundaries. And secondly, of course, just always, always, always let your child know that he or she is the best thing that ever happened to you.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you again for coming on today.
Thanks, guys. It's been wonderful.
And we'll have to have you on again with another aspect of psychology. I'll see the rest of you in a couple of weeks.